Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is the regular meeting of the Brookline Select Board for February 9, 2021. Like all meetings of the Select Board during this ongoing COVID pandemic crisis, this meeting is being held remotely using the Zoom platform. I need to tell you that the meeting is also being recorded, and the recording of this meeting will be a public record. So if you're concerned about your image being a public record during the public comment period or otherwise, please turn off your video during those times. So let's start off with updates and announcements. I'd like to add a couple, or start with a couple first. Please remember to hold the date. February 16, our next meeting, when our representative in the U.S. Congress, Jake Auchincloss, will be appearing and ready to answer any questions you have. And I'd like to suggest that the Select Board members prepare questions in advance that they may have concerning his work in Washington and his ideas. Note that he has been appointed to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So he'll be dealing with a lot of things of relevance to Brookline and the Boston area. Next, I'd like to, excuse me, give congratulations to Brookline Police Officer John Jennings on being awarded a commendation for his work as a member of the Crisis Intervention Team by the Norfolk County CIT Training and Technical Assistance Center, also the Department of Mental Health and the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They all awarded a commendation to him for his work. One of the criteria for receiving this award, and I think this is really important, is a demonstrated commitment to the principles behind crisis intervention teams, including successfully interacting with individuals in crisis, going above and beyond in working with vulnerable individuals or groups in their community, and other things, but those two in particular. And as an illustration of Officer Jennings' value to the community he serves, I asked Devin to place in the board's packet an email received from a grateful mother on whose family John Jennings has had an incredible impact. I urge you to read it, and I urge the public to read it because it'll be available as a public document. The Policing Reform Committee is looking at the police department's 100% participation in CIT training that provides the community with the ability to effectively help people in crisis on a 24/7 basis, which is just one piece of the department's ongoing work to ensure that we support people in crisis at all times of the day, every day. So those are the two announcements I have. Any other announcements from the Select Board? Ms. Heller.
I would like to make one quick announcement about a change in meeting date. The Center Street Zoning Committee had originally set out a date of February 24th. That was a Wednesday for our second meeting. However, the architects have asked us to grant them more time to work on plans. So we have done that. We have not actually scheduled a second meeting yet, but we anticipate that it will be toward the middle or end of March. I just wanted anybody to know who has that date on their calendar to please strike it off. And we will be sending out, we have an email list, and if you're not on it, you can get on it. Just email vpanak@brooklinema.gov. That's Victor Panak, who's the planner who's working with us. So I just wanted you to know to amend your calendars. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other updates or comments? Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Van Scoyac.
I always like to wait to see if there's anybody else, and then I don't get in on time. So I spent part of this afternoon with one eye glued on the audit report for the fiscal year 20 for the town of Brookline, which I highly recommend to folks who love to delve into numbers and try to figure out what the language of auditors means. But we'll be discussing that later tonight. But with the other eye, I was watching the proceedings in the impeachment trial. And I'm sorry to take advantage of this time just to make a comment, but I sort of feel it's necessary. Because I mentioned last week that people should be observing events in Russia because of the example there of tyranny that is threatening what is a very fragile democracy. Not even sure it should be called a democracy. It's just as important, and I don't think I even need to tell people this, to be keeping an eye on this impeachment trial because of the issues that are at stake. And on the one hand, I think we can all take solace and find hope in the fact that we survived what was, it was referred to this way today, an event whose seriousness hasn't really sunk in with the entire population of this country. I think there are many who are still in denial about the seriousness of what happened, but there can be no doubt about the seriousness if you listened and watched the video replay from today's proceedings, that the future of the democracy in this country was truly threatened. And nothing symbolizes that more greatly than two things that were mentioned, that there were congresspersons and senators truly in fear of their lives during this event. And in fact, there was even, the thought that went through their heads that, oh my God, they're going to kill all of us. I mean, that was how serious this event was. The other thing that I wanted to highlight from today is the really moving testimony about the Capitol Hill police officer who was attacked by one of the mob with an American flag. And, to consider that the future, the survival of our government hinged on the heroism of people such as that Capitol Hill police officer who had to withstand being attacked with the flagpole, the American flag still on it. I don't know how you get more poignant than that as to what was at stake in this. And I want to just both mention my added congratulations to our own Officer Jennings, but also just as a general matter, say once again how fortunate we were on that day that we had brave Capitol Hill police who prevented something that would have been one of the most lamentable events in the history of this country. As it was pretty darn bad, but could have been a lot worse. So I thank everyone for indulging me in that comment.
Thank you. It's an important comment. And despite what you've told us, there are senators who think that this is nothing to really be concerned about. Let him go about his own way in terms of the president. And what I say to that is, if you can't defend yourself when under attack, how can you expect us to believe you can defend this country? Well, that's my 2 cents too. Okay, any other announcements? Mr. Fernandez.
Sure. First of all, John, thanks for those comments. I appreciated those. And just on another note, 2 things, but related. One, I had the pleasure of meeting with a group last night called Feet First, which is a branch of the Corey Hill Salisbury Road Neighborhood Association for members over 65. And it was a great group, and they've actually been we have the Reform Committee on Policing, the Task Force to Reimagine Policing, and then there's the group Feet First, which has met with in the past with the Chief of Police, Officers Prentice Pilot and Zarai Mascoon, as well as most recently Annabelle Lane, the phenomenal social worker that we have at the police department, and now me. I mean, they're doing the work to really understand issues relative to policing in Brookline. So I just wanted to thank them for doing that and engaging so deeply in this work. And to thank everyone who showed up to the now 5 public hearings that we've held recently for the task force. And to remind folks that we'll be meeting again this Friday as our regular meeting from 8 to 10 a.m. But we have a public hearing coming up next Wednesday, February 17th. And we'll remind you about that meeting at the select board meeting next Tuesday, but just want to give you a heads up. Look for that on the Brookline calendar. And we're looking for all manner of feedback. Our reports are also available by going to the task force website on the Brookline website. So please read those reports, and we would love your feedback. If you can't make any of those hearings, you can send in comments to Devin Fields at dfields@brooklinema.gov. We would love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, let's get to public comments. Before we go there, as many of you know, I've decided to run for re-election to the select board. I'm glad to be able to report that Ms. Heller has also decided to run for re-election. You know, we don't always agree, but we're always willing to work together for the good of the town. My running for re-election may create some issues during these acrimonious times when I'm also presiding over this segment of the select board's meeting, the public comment period. I expect to be subject to what I would call politically motivated attacks, to which I would be tempted to respond, even though that would be inappropriate. I expect also to be subject to political comments based on the overwhelming amount of positive emails I get that would be supportive of me. But it would also be inappropriate to respond to those supportive comments. So to avoid the problem, Ms. Hamilton, who serves as coach or vice chair, has agreed to preside over the public comment period during the election campaign. This idea in part was suggested by Mr. O'Neill during last week's public comment period. In addition, we are reviewing our 5-year-old public comment policy with the eye to updating it. In the meantime, comments that relate to individual personnel matters will not be allowed, and Ms. Hamilton will have the right to terminate any public comments or Zoom conduct or displays that she believes are inappropriate. So with that, Ms. Hamilton, please take over and take public comments.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for joining us for public comment to those watching. We are all volunteer elected officials who serve out of a sense of duty to this community. And we do our best to represent as many different points of view that are in this community as possible. Each person speaking is limited to 3 minutes. Please refrain from personal attacks or from addressing personnel issues during this period, as the chair mentioned. You are welcome to send the board members an email expressing your thoughts in more detail. If a speaker has reached the 3-minute limit or violates other expectations, I will ask the other board members if there are any objections before instructing Devin to mute the speaker. Let's begin. Devin, will you promote the first speaker?
Yes, the first person signed up for public comment is Kea Vanderseel. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin when you're ready.
Very much. It's good to talk to you. I have some prepared comments. Unlike some who did or do not know what to say in response to the storming of the nation's capital on January 6th, I have found it hard to know where to start. There's way too much to say, and it cannot be said and cannot be done justice to in the 3 minutes that are allotted for me to speak. I would like to start agreeing with Select Board Member Raul Fernandez that those who believe in the false narrative of a stolen election, despite all the evidence to the contrary, and wild conspiracy theories such as a pedophile ring operating out of a pizza parlor orchestrated by Democrats, do not belong in law enforcement. In addition, it's just not whether or not members of our own police were physically part of the insurrection. Those who are supportive of the rioters should be carefully scrutinized. Some might consider Select Board Fernandez's comments to be intemperate. However, I would urge Detective Keaveney and Sergeant Hatchett to examine their own comments for divisiveness and hate. Are they really so blind to how inappropriate and inflammatory the statements were? Were they unable to foresee the torrent of abuse directed at Select Board Member Fernandez that they unleashed? Their speech needs to be viewed as a green light to the most fervent supporters of white supremacy in our communities. I would advise them to listen to the recording of their own statements. I understand that Dr. Fernandez and Detective Keaveney had a long discussion about these events. Meaningful discussion of the events of the past month require a level of introspection that I hope we all have. It is easy to decry the online abuse heaped on Fernandez by an anonymous public. It seems to be harder, perhaps near impossible, to call out abusive speech when it comes from our own Brookline police. In his statement, Acting Chief Mark Morgan was unable to do that. To date, the 4 other Select Board members have also been unable to do so. We have a long history of trying to ignore racism in this town. We are not exempt from this national phenomenon. We may put a Black Lives Matter sign in front of the town hall, but if we do not back this up with actions, our sentiments are hollow. One final thought. It is not up to Select Board Member Fernandez to figure out a response to all these threats to him, especially those coming from with our own police force. Rather, it is up to all of us, especially those of us who are white, to figure out how we can root out the racist tendencies that underlie our society. We cannot continue to ask the victims of racism and the other isms of our time to solve our problems for us. If white people and their sympathizers who are not white cannot do this work, I grieve for our nation and town and fear that we will continue in our old patterns that have impeded any progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Janelle, who doesn't look to be at his seat.
Maybe leave him promoted and promote the next person. Oh, I see a shadow. Danelle.
The next person signed up for public comment is Hajar. You've been promoted to a panelist and your time will begin when you're ready.
Good evening. My name is Hagar Dalshad. I'm a physician assistant and practiced for 20 years. I'm a mother of 2 children. My husband is also an ICU physician, and we've been working on the front lines of COVID since March. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I thank each of you individually and collectively for the work you're putting in to herald Brookline through this very, very strange year. I want to share with you all the experience of being a parent in Brookline in this year. As you know, Brookline has a very good test positivity rate compared to the remainder of the state. As of last week, our positivity rate was only 1.5%, and that's down from 2.8% just 2 weeks before that. So we've halved our positivity rate in the span of 2 weeks. And we are the lowest among each and every single one of our neighbors, including Boston, Newton, Dedham, etc. In Brookline, the cases per 100,000 are 19 per 100,000 individuals in the last week. That means that there's actually a total of 12 people with COVID tested positive in the last week. Brookline schools have been closed for over a year, for almost a year, with access to normal schooling for children other than kindergartners. I have a 2nd grader and a 7th grader. I cannot fathom how this has been allowed to go on for so long. Just learning that the budget of the schools account for 60% of the town budget. It is just inconceivable to me that this has been permitted to go on as long as it has. Children are going to school, if they have elected to stay in school, for an average of 1.5 days a week, with numerous extra half days and all kinds of extra planning days thrown into the schedule. We need to hold the school and district leaders accountable. We need to hold the Public Health Commission accountable for policies that are out of step with science, that are no longer based in evidence and recent research. As a medical professional, I've been following the Panel 4 guidelines and reading the research myself. There is absolutely no reason to maintain a 6-foot standard in the classrooms at the cost of keeping thousands of children out of the class, day in and day out. I hope you'll look to learn about the mental health crisis facing children and adolescents in Brookline and around the country due to lack of access to schools. It is an absolute crisis. Speak to any physician who works at Children's Hospital, and they'll let you know that in the ER, there's not any COVID, there's no flu. There are kids waiting to be hospitalized for psychiatric holds, for suicide attempts, for unsafe. Please consider what you think what is right to do in this time. We need to hold school and district leaders accountable. We need to prioritize the well-being of students, and mental health is health. Please pay attention to this subject, and please consult with the school committee to make this allow more students to access daily school, because it is safe.
Thank you very much for your comment. We will be hearing from Dr. Jett in a while, and we will be sure to ask these very pointed questions that you raised. Thank you so much. Devin, have we heard from Danelle?
I believe he is back. Danelle, you've been promoted and your 3 minutes will begin when you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. My apologies. My partner just walked in the house. So Donnell O'Neill, Senior, town meeting member from Precinct 4. I want to first of all say thank you guys for adjusting before the policy has been created, before modifying the select board regular meeting policy. I think this is I just thank you guys for doing this. Appreciate it. So I want to speak tonight about the new marijuana retail store that's about to open up or be considered to open up on Commonwealth Avenue. And I was just curious if when's the last time we've had like a public hearing in regards to what's the Forefront Ventures mission, I think it's called. I just want to know when's the next time there's going to be like a public hearing about, what they plan to do, when they plan to open up the diversity plan, the whole nine. We've had some horrible experiences with Netta and with Sanctuary, and it would be horrible to see something negative happen. Also, the Racial Equity Advancement Fund, like that hasn't even been implemented yet, and we're talking about another MSO coming into town. So I would like for the town, for y'all, for whoever's there, the next time they come up, to put a pause on it, to pump the brakes a little bit, as they say here, on letting them open up. They have a lot of money, and we promised the town that we would do better. And we haven't even implemented the Racial Equity Advancement Fund. We say we want to do better as a town, and I think it's time we start practicing what we preach. And thank you, Devin. I appreciate you. So we can continue this next Tuesday, but I just feel we need to do better, and instead take a break on letting this new dispensary open up before we take care of the Racial Equity Advancement Fund. Thank you. See you next Tuesday.
Thank you very much for your comment. We will work with staff to identify what the date and timeline is for any new retail marijuana business to open, and we will make that available.
At this time, there are no further comments or people signed up for public comment.
Great. So I turn I turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. You did an excellent job, and I was able to sit back and relax.
Teamwork.
Yes, yes. Okay, moving on to miscellaneous items. Question of approving the meeting minutes for the Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021 meeting of the Select Board. Any comments or questions or edits for those minutes? Seeing none, I move approval of the Select Board minutes for February 2nd, 2021. All in favor, Ms. Heller,
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez,
Aye.
Mr. Vanscoya,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Next, I'd like to take the items 3B to 3C together or in omnibus fashion. The select board members have had a chance to review and request a more in-depth discussion on items they desire to look at closer, and none have done so. So we'll vote them in omnibus fashion. Items 3B, change order in the Putterham Library bathroom renovations project. 3C, accepting a grant from the Massachusetts Health Officers Association to the Department of Public Health. And that's to support their efforts in Brookline during the ongoing COVID-19 health emergency. And I guess it's just two. Did I say three?
That's it.
Okay, no, just those two. All in favor, Ms. Heller,
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez,
Aye.
Mr. Vanscoya,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Next, COVID-19 update. Mr. Kleckner, is Dr. Jett here?
I don't see him yet, but while he's being located and promoted, why don't I begin? I won't talk about specific statistics or trends, but I will mention that effective yesterday, the state did increase capacity limits at restaurants and other retail establishments. There was some regional discussion about whether that would be appropriate for the communities in the greater Boston region, and ultimately it was determined that there would not be any coordinated effort to defer that. I think our focus obviously is on vaccination, and I participated in a meeting today with the Lieutenant Governor, and the Lieutenant Governor was questioned quite a bit by our municipal officials who were on the call. And could you just take that update off it? Thank you. And so the Lieutenant Governor was asked a number of pointed questions by municipal officials in the audience about, what role there is for municipal governments to issue the vaccine, given that we have experience in doing inoculations, flu vaccines, and other things in the past, and we're closest to the people, especially the most vulnerable people. But it was pretty clear. I think part of it relates to the availability of the vaccine, but also a philosophy that the state is trying to focus on these mass vaccination sites and these regional centers, which, of course, we have sites at both sides of our community, in Fenway Park on one side, Reggie Lewis Center on the other. Yet, I think it's fair to say that we believe we would be better off giving more doses to be able to design our own way to get the vaccine to our residents, especially our most vulnerable residents. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. But at this point, we've been criticized for not, as a town, issuing the vaccine, and we just don't have the permission to do so, despite our willingness to do that. And I want to be very clear about that. Hopefully that will change as we go further into the phases and more vaccine becomes available. But at this time, it does not appear that other than the modest doses that we've been given, which I know Dr. Jett will be prepared to talk about, as well as, I should say, collaborating with other entities in our community that do get the vaccine, for example, the Housing Authority, we will probably not be a major vaccine distribution site in the future. With that, I'll ask Dr. Jett if he could talk about the COVID stats and trends, talk a little bit about vaccine, and then answer the questions that the board may have.
Yeah, this is going to be very quick because I only have the, wish I could still find it. Good evening, everyone. Our numbers are dropping. We haven't had any new deaths, but our cases are rising slowly, but it's not to the extent that it was before. Over the last week or so, we still had a decline in cases. It was 81 the prior week, and this week we're down to 68. So, one of the things I still want to iterate, because people look for positivity rate, and it's a lot of discussion upon that. Positivity rate means nothing unless you test everybody at the same time. What you're looking for is the incidence of new cases, and that's what we as epidemiologists always use. So I just want to keep that in mind as people begin to argue about this. We thought we were going to launch and start to vaccinate people 75 and older. Unfortunately, we just received those vaccines to make sure we vaccinated first responders, which this is the second dose, and we're giving it out this week. The state did not give us our allocation of 100 doses. Furthermore, it has pushed out any collaboration with BHA. I don't think that would happen when we would actually be able to put in for doses for another 2 weeks. The state has opened up a site where people can set up an appointment if they have any calls or questions, 211 for 75 and older. We have diverted people to that site. In terms of emergency management, to open up the call center, the calls have dwindled down dramatically to almost 13 calls a day. So I suggest today it wasn't even worth continue to have the manpower and the site opening. Any calls that people may have can go into the health department. So that's about all of I have. I can entertain any questions. There's a lot of information out there, but I've had talks with the state, with different entities. The health department at this point would not be a big player in vaccinations. If we are, I fully hope that we can be in phase 3. But I see as the large sites, that'll be the trend for the future, unless something, or CVS or Walgreens. So that's going to leave a lot of people that might not have the physical ability or some other limitation to get to these other sites. It might hinder the vaccination process.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hamilton.
So we had a woman join us for public comment, asking about schools reopening and whatnot. What is the thought process? What are the things that you have to weigh when recommending whether or not, children and teachers should be allowed back into schools?
Well, I think that's a conversation, that has to work through Dr. Marini and the school committee. The way I weigh in is usually toward the end, just like with the private schools. If you reopen, how do you plan to, feed people? How you plan on using, the 6 feet distance and a mask so that the disease doesn't spread in the school? And those are some of the factors. When we noticed that there were issues when the 6 feet distance was relaxed in private schools, I did pass a commissioner's order to ensure everybody fell in line with that. Now, if the school system decides to, move toward 3 feet, I think you can anticipate problems just because the magnitude of the disease hasn't changed. And I don't think CDC or WHO said the disease doesn't transmit, in distances less than 6 feet. So until that science changes, I think we still should stay with the 6 feet distancing. And we do for any other business at this time. So we haven't changed it, relaxed it for, restaurants, sporting events, etc. So.
So who's recommending the 3 feet?
So
I
right
thought
now,
that was the DESI
that was
proposal.
Desi originally, and there was a lot of pressure, political pressure to get kids back in schools. And so, as you would see in the coming weeks, a lot of people would want to relax the standards. But I think, people make a good point. Brookline has been in a good position. And the reason why is because we have stuck to the science of the disease. Once you begin to relax the science, then that's when you can anticipate what's going to occur, and that'll be more outbreaks.
Ms. Heller, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So, this subject is a trade-off because many, as we know from emergency room physicians and others, that there is a crisis among children and their mental health. They're not used to being isolated. This is very difficult for them, or they're taking it personally, I guess. I mean, I don't understand all of the psychology of it, but it concerns me that there are these effects. And we also know, although those aren't as mentioned as much, that there are effects from kids' eye health because they're looking at the computers so much. There's an increased rate apparently of myopia. So I know that the school committee had convened what they called Panel 4, which is to look at the science and recommendations around distancing in the schools. Now, if this presupposes that all of the other safety measures, if you relax the 6 feet, are in place, such as mask wearing and ventilation and hand washing. And so they've recently on Friday, as I understand it, come out with a series of recommendations. There are 4 of them. And they reviewed the available evidence and they also reviewed the recommendations from WHO, the World Health Organization, which is recommending a distance of 1 meter, which is 3.3 feet. If there's frequent hand washing, respiratory hygiene, age-appropriate mask and use, ventilation and environmental cleaning measures, etc. So that's the WHO. And then the CDC also says seating and contact should be at least 6 feet apart when feasible. They've amended their recommendation to say when all of this is feasible or when it's possible. They talk about food service as feasible. Again, preferably outdoors if it can be done instead of a communal dining hall. We know that that's challenging and we have to look outside to figure that out. But that, there are recommendations about the food service, that they remain 6 feet apart and that the tables and chairs are clean between each use. And then there's the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and the Education Department, which are also recommends that the school system aim for 6 feet where feasible, but if it's not, 3 feet is acceptable minimum as long as staff and students wear masks covering the nose and mouth at all times. So, we're on the head of a pin here because we want them to be physically safe and we want them to not have COVID and we want them not to transmit it, but we also want them to be mentally healthy and we don't want their eyes to deteriorate. So how do we balance this? And I'm wondering.
I would say, how do you balance it? If you're going to make a rule for one sector, then you have to make the rule for everybody. If you're going to relax 6 feet distancing, you have to do it for every business, every entity, every stadium, everything. Because what we did, again, we held the standard for private schools. If we say the disease is no longer, it only can be transmitted and we change the distance on that because the science dictates that, then I think it needs to be done across the board, not just for the school sector.
Well, let me ask you this. Isn't the science of transmission between children much, much less than in the adult population? It's the adults who are much more affected by this than kids are. And I think that's where the CDC and the World Health Organization and the Mass Department of Public Health are coming from. They're not saying that among adults we should allow less than 6 feet. In fact, there's a lot of worry today on the news about the Super Bowl being a super spreader because so many adults were so near each other during that event. But so I do think that there's a difference there, and I think we have to recognize that. These organizations also want the teachers to be 6 feet apart from the kids. And that's something that, we can work on. Now, the school system apparently is planning to bring back their first graders on March 1st. And they're working to phase in the other grades based on things like materials. They need to modify instead of having tables, they need to have little desks so that they can push them apart and that kind of thing. But it seems to me that we need to protect our kids. They're probably less at risk at this point for COVID than they are for mental illness, which is a serious issue to me.
So one, the schools March 1st will allow first graders back, maintaining 6 feet distancing. Number two, the kids don't carry a less viral load. They carry the same viral load as adults do. And the science dictates that they just do not hold the disease long enough in their body as opposed to adults. So it has lesser effect and it's had lesser deaths. But kids that contract it easily spread it to adults. And so that's a misnomer. And the data does dictate that.
Well, I would urge us all to, on Friday, panel 4 is meeting with panel 2, which is panel 2 is the group that's researching the issues of social and emotional well-being among children. And they're going to have a discussion on Friday. I'm not sure of the time. I suspect it's going to be around 3 o'clock, which is when I know panel 4 has been meeting. But I think that that's something we should all pay attention to, and certainly read the report if we can't be there to hear it and hear the discussion. But I have problem with. I mean, the panel 4 is composed of everyone on the panel is some sort of infectious disease medical person, scientist, emergency room worker, physician or nurse, and so I have, I don't believe that they would be recommending this if the statistics and the science didn't support it.
Well, I would just say this, panel 4 has often been in conflict with the Advisory Council on Public Health and the recommendation. And they have introduced their biases into wanting kids back in school. And so those two bodies, one is sanctioned by yourself and the select board. So I think when the conversation comes up among ACPH, which is public health, and it's the only entity that are public health professionals. The panel 4 does not make up public health professionals. So I think
there are some on there who are public health professionals, but I think it's unfortunate that we haven't been able to recruit someone from, and that's on us and people in the community who haven't stepped up to the plate to have an infectious disease person, and we have plenty of them in the community. We don't lack on the Advisory Council of Public Health, and I would like to look into that because I think it's an important lack. And, you know, we can't expect people who aren't in the field to understand the breadth and depth of it necessarily. I mean, I certainly, you know, don't understand all the charts and things that this panel 4 has come up with. But I think that that would be an improvement in our review of all of the issues, because one of the issues we do deal with in this community is infectious diseases, and we've just not been able to recruit someone on that advisory council who deals in infectious disease, and I would hope that we can do better on that front.
Well, I would have a little pushback to say you probably have to look at the makeup of the ACPH. You do have that expertise among them. And then I am an epidemiologist, which is infectious disease. So I wouldn't discount the basis of the knowledge base that you currently have, and you have just added a pediatrician. These are the top, and we have an emergency room physician that ran it, and Dr. Moya. So I think you have to look at the current body that we have, the current makeup, and they are the leading experts in their field and have been for quite some time.
Okay. You know, Ms. Heller and I are former lawyers, what people call recovering lawyers. And and we know that get 2 lawyers in the room, you get opinions on something that are widely divergent. So I think that that's probably the case with the medical field. So I think the real issue here is there communication and maybe even collaboration between the Advisory Committee on Public Health and these panels that the school committee has set up, including panel 4. I mean, I know there can't be, you know, intensive communication and collaboration, but there is there some outreach between those, you know, from one side to the other to try to work through some of the differences of opinion, differences of you know, what research they credit, et cetera.
So there has been a lot of communication, not to the extent, because what should happen, panel 4 is a body of the school committee. That's who they advise. ACPH is a body that advises me and the select board.
Okay, but we
try to meet with them periodically. In fact, they invited us this Friday. Those who can attend will attend. But you know, we have met with them, and if we have had different opinions, those differences have came out and we have discussed.
Right.
I don't think we'll ever be totally on the same page with everything. And the school committee and the panel 4, they meet weekly. So it's very intense between panel 2 and panel 4.
Okay. Yeah, I would just say, you know, that interaction with them is critically important. And as a select board chair, I give you license to meet with them whenever you want. It's a joke. Okay. Mr. Vince, good.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think other members might have questions.
Yeah, no, I was about to call on one. Mr. Vince, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would gladly defer to Raul Fernandez.
Oh, wait, go ahead.
I couldn't tell if you were gesturing or not.
No, I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
I'm famous for my forefinger. So 2 things. There's a question in the Q&A that I want to ask first, and then I have a question of my own. The question in the Q&A is, could you comment on the distinction between quarantining 7 days or quarantining 10 days? Would it be possible to reduce from 10 days to 7 days the quarantine period?
Well, for one, we don't quarantine anybody 7 days or 10 days. We quarantine people for 14 days. Quarantine means you don't have the disease and you were exposed to somebody with it. Isolation is if you have the disease, you isolate it for 10 days. That can be reduced if you no longer have symptoms in 3 days without being febrile or, you know, anything else. So, but every individual is different.
Well, perhaps the question was isolation versus quarantine. Could the threshold be 7 days rather than 10 days?
For quarantine,
No, for isolation.
the standard is 10 days. That's the
Mhm.
gold standard.
And I'll just move to the question that I wanted to raise myself. And first I'll say you have always had my vote of confidence, and you continue to have it wholeheartedly. And one of the reasons for that is that I sleep better at night when I look at the numbers for Brookline, and I realize that sure, there's lots of questions that can be raised about this, but the results are that there have been fewer deaths and fewer cases in Brookline than in many, many, many communities, comparable communities as well. And I think we all have to keep that in mind. Having said that, I will also note that, no less a figure than Governor Cuomo, when asked about lifting a lockdown, said if we don't allow people to go back to the stores and so on, there won't be any stores to go back to. I mean, you do reach a point where the trade-offs in terms of the restrictions become so punitive that one has to question what is our actual tolerance of risk, and have we passed the point where our the impact on us is so great in terms of the vitality of our society and the peace of mind and the education being received by school children and the peace of mind of their families, that we've got to weigh that and we've got to factor that in. And I think I don't have the answer. I don't have the expertise, and I don't have the answer. I do know that there's a widespread disagreement on this, and a perception that Brookline has gone overboard, and that it has some very severe consequences. There are families that are in pain right now. If I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the testimony at the most recent school committee meeting, and there was testimony a week before that as well. It is heart-wrenching. We're talking about children who every day cry. We're talking about children who are reduced to tears and saying out loud, I just can't do this. I must be stupid, because they are limited to at-home learning, and it doesn't work for them. And that impacts them, it impacts their parents. It's a daily issue, day in and day out, and you can really hear in the voices of people who have appeared at these school committee meetings that it's beginning to not just cause pain, but cause families to themselves not know what to do. So my answer is, because as I say, I'm not the expert. I don't know if the right decisions are being made here. I do know that we've done better than a lot of neighboring communities. But I think the ability to communicate with those people and to give them a sense that they're being heard is extremely important. And I do hear our chair has raised this very same issue, communication. I hear it said repeatedly that people just don't feel like anybody is listening to them. They just don't feel like they know how to get their message through to the public health department. And so I'm just going to throw out a suggestion. That's all it is. It might be a dumb idea. It might be a good idea. But for starters, if there was just a weekly Zoom call, ask Dr. Jet, where anyone can participate and try to get their questions in and to communicate directly to the person in charge, rather than to try to figure out, is my kid, going through this daily agony because of decisions that are being made in places I don't even know how to impact. I don't know if it's a school committee decision. I don't know if it's a Dr. Jet decision. Okay. I don't know if it's a Dr. Marini decision. They need someone to talk to. And it'd be wonderful if we could give them an opportunity to talk to you directly on a weekly basis.
I will have a little pushback on that because I'm not the right person to talk to about school-related decisions. I get enough emails from parents, from teachers, from the overall community about the school committee and the superintendent and whatever panels they put together to come up with those decisions. They just have to confer with me when they get to the final stage to review the plan, just like I reviewed anybody's plan that they have done reopening in a town.
Yeah.
And I've been consistent across the board and fair to everybody.
Let me say before Mr. Fernandez, I think it's important for this board to understand that the issue of balancing risk is our issue. And it's our problem. It's not Dr. Jett's problem. His responsibility is to give the science, the facts, and the science, and then we decide whether we want to take a chance, so that we can open up businesses, or whether we want to be more conservative. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Mr. Fernandez?
Yeah, I actually saw Mel had his hand up. I don't know if Mel, you wanted to talk first.
Sure. This is a very difficult issue, obviously. I do want to clarify. I do believe that it is the elected school committee role to balance those risks as it relates to the health and welfare and of our school children, of our children in the community. And I agree with all the points about they need to have the best information possible, and to the extent that their panels and our advisory board, our advisory council, as well as Dr. Jett can and help inform them. And if this board wants to get involved, then I think you need to talk to the school committee and figure out how to collaborate with them. I will say that although it shouldn't be the test for everything, there is a reason why Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Newton, Wellesley, none of them are back in school. And I think Brookline probably is leading this gradual transition back to an in-school setting. So, I think it's not fair to say that somehow Brookline is leading the way on keeping children out of school. It's a very contentious issue. I think you read about some of the articles, not only for Brookline, but in other jurisdictions. It is extremely contentious because of what's at stake. And we all, I have children. I understand they're the most precious thing we have, but we also have a lot of other factors to consider. That's all.
Yeah, and I would just add, Mr. Kleckner is right. There are other places that, nobody's in school, nobody's playing sports, including my 17-year-old son. He's not playing sports, and he's not in school. He's at home. So I would just ask them, and I don't know, whatever data we have, just like each one of you have asked me, make sure it's local data. Let's not use anything national. And then whatever decision they come up with, we have to live with the outcomes. And I'm fine with that if that's whatever they choose to do. But I'm for them bringing kids back. I just think they need to do it in a safe manner. That's my only suggestion.
Mr. Fernandez?
Thanks, Bernard. And I'll be brief because Mel and Bernard, you made some of the comments I was going to make here. I mean, I'm not sure where the narrative came about. Where the narrative came about that somehow Dr. Jett is solely responsible for kids being out of school right now, but that nothing could be further from the truth. We have 9 elected school committee members and an administration that are balancing all of these issues and concerns, not to mention a teachers union that has concerns for the safety of teachers within schools and paras and everybody else in the schools. One of my questions, Dr. Jett, was, and it seems like the answer may be no because of the limited supply of vaccine that we're getting. I mean, just truly limited supply. Is there any way or that we can, if not now, soon, leverage the vaccine that we're getting to vaccinate teachers and maybe, if possible, move this process forward a little bit?
That's a good question. I signed a letter with the school department to the governor to ask for Brookline to become a hub where we could vaccinate teachers and students to bring them back sooner. Don't know if that will happen. I think I might have heard a reply already that said no. But, in order to keep everybody safe, which is the end goal, To me, that would be the ideal scenario. If you want to bring essential workers back, you have to vaccinate. It's unfortunate now we're in a pandemic. We're still experiencing a lot of cases in different areas, and we're still experiencing death. And so we're trying to measure risk, versus whatever we want to do, whatever is acceptable for us to do, and we're trying to deal with that. But unfortunately, there's consequences to that. So,
all right. The and I'm glad you all are at least asking the question and trying to get this done. It seems like that's one of the key issues right now, and we're municipalities are getting all this heat from the governor's office and DESE about not having everyone back in school right now. One of the things that would help with doing that is actually having teachers be vaccinated. I hope that they find some way to prioritize teachers in this next phase. The other piece, meanwhile, and this is the last thing I'll have, is that I saw, it was astonishing to me. I'm curious to get your take on it, but not including asthma as one of the conditions that would allow someone to access vaccine in this next phase, for a disease that attacks the respiratory system, and is certainly much more prominent in Black and Brown communities. I'm just curious to get your take on that, if that's something that we should be pushing back on the governor's office in terms of the guidelines for phase 2 or the availability of vaccine in phase 2.
Well, I would just tell you, if I have the vaccine in my hand, I make sure people that have asthma are priority, as they should be.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Clark, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I think it's unlikely, Raul, that we would be given permission to do that kind of vaccination program. I did want to mention that both the town and the schools have testing programs, so they're not vaccination, but they're testing programs. And there's a lot of money being spent, relatively speaking, and that was done specifically to try to make the best case to have more people in school as much as we can.
Okay, any other questions? Issues you want to bring? Let me ask one question. Let's see, there's something in the chat with respect to ventilation in restaurants. Are you able to require restaurants to provide the type of ventilation that is used in schools to clear the air of potential viruses? Is that physically or technically possible?
Well, we do have the type of ventilation systems we're using in the school system. So, and I think, we discussed HEPA filters, and I believe we bought 900 of them. It's been a while ago since, we talked about that. As far as the restaurants, everybody came up with some type of ventilation plan, even the Coolidge Theater as well. Mm-hmm. So I think the restaurants have done a good job. Now, what I have seen, which I wouldn't promote, I've seen some school districts, when it was 10 degrees outside, only have the windows open. So when you talk about some strange things going on to get people in the classroom, that's something that I don't want to see.
Okay, good. So any other discussion, Ms. Heller?
Just to follow up on Mel's point about the testing, I know that all of the faculty, the school department teachers and et cetera, were tested 1,700 people, and there were only very few positives. Now, of course, this is a rolling problem because you could be tested one day and, get the virus the next day. So you can never rely on a negative test completely, but I do think it is a good thing that it shows that it's, at least at the point that they were tested, that the rate is extraordinarily low.
One other thing.
I'm supportive of continuing to test. I think we really need to do that because it's a way of identifying the situation, whether we have, are we testing employees as well, Mel? In the town?
No, just if they're symptomatic.
Are we testing the sewage? That's one way of.
I believe the MWRA is doing that, but I'm not familiar.
Do they give us, results for Brookline, or can they?
I'm not sure, Bernard. I'll check on that.
Okay.
Well, it may be that we have to keep our eye on it, but I'm hopeful that when this COVID relief package passes, that we will get some more resources for things like testing, and we can do more testing of our town employees and others, because I think testing is a good way to make sure we keep the rate down. If we catch a case, a positive case, then that person can be quarantined and not spread it to others so quickly. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jett.
Well, thank you for your time and support today.
Thank you.
So next, the fiscal year 2020 audit report. We have Craig Peacock of Powers and Sullivan, which reviewed, which prepared the audit, which was reviewed by the town's audit committee on December 9. And let me fix my thing here. And let me just tell you about the audit committee, because the audit committee is comprised of some pretty capable people who I think do a very good job of reviewing the audit and making sure that there's nothing missing or nothing that's not clear. The audit committee has 3 members appointed by the moderator. That's Greg Grobstein with the accounting firm Pricewaterhouse. Okay, some background noise here. Okay. Greg Grobstein with the auditing firm or accounting firm Pricewaterhouse, Peter Finnerty also with Pricewaterhouse, and Jim Littleton with Integrated Financial Partners, which is an investment advisory firm. As I said, those members are appointed by the moderator. The advisory committee appointee is Lee Selwyn, who we all know, a town meeting member, precinct 13, and the founder of Economics and Technologies, Inc., a economics research firm. The school committee is represented by Suzanne Federspiel, its chair, and I represent the select board and serve as chair of the audit committee. Ex officio members are Gina Fanconi, the finance director, Michael DePietro, comptroller Mary Ellen Norman, deputy superintendent for finance and administration, and our very own Melissa Goff, deputy town administrator. So like I said, we have a pretty powerful audit committee reviewing the audit for us. And what they're reviewing are basically 6 documents, which of course are in our packet. I assume that people have at least skimmed through them, but they are the transmittal letter written by the town, the management discussion and analysis, also written by the town, the audit of the financial statements, that the auditor reviews the financial statements that are prepared by the town and audits them. 4th, the management letter prepared by Powers and Sullivan that addresses management issues with recommendations for strengthening internal controls and operating efficiency. This is something that is not required by the auditing standards boards, but is a Brookline tradition. And maybe Mr. Klettner can explain that tradition to us. And number 5, report on federal award programs, or the single audit, which is an examination of the internal controls with respect to federally funded programs. And there's a final document called required supplemental information. Powers and Sullivan is based in Wakefield, Massachusetts, and performs audits for many municipalities. We've been using them for quite a few years. I don't remember exactly how many. They participate in the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants peer review program that rates a firm's quality control and its performance of auditing and accounting. And Brookline, as a recipient of significant federal funds, is required by the Single Audit Act regulations to request a copy of the auditor's peer review report, which we've done. Is we prepare it every 3 years, and the most recent report that we've received gave Powers and Sullivan a grade of pass. Now that may sound like pass fail, but it's really pass on a scale of pass, pass with deficiencies, and fail. So they've got the highest highest rating through this this review. Powers and Sullivan is under contract with us. A contract that commenced in August 2015 and covered fiscal years ending on June 30 of 2016 through 2018. And the town had an option to renew for fiscal years ending 2019 and 2020, which we exercised, so that this year's audit, this fiscal year's audit, 2020, is covered by that option to extend. This year's audit, which commenced in, I think, August of 2020, was, of course, very difficult because of the COVID pandemic. But despite that difficulty of performing an audit largely using remote platforms like Zoom and other platforms for meetings, and delivering voluminous documents by electronic mail, we've been told by Mr. Peacock that, and told in private conversations without staff present, that the staff did an excellent job. The audit went very smoothly, and Powers and Sullivan was provided with all the information they needed in sufficient time to complete the audit. So that's good news. Following many questions and suggested clarifying edits to the report, the audit committee unanimously voted to approve the audit. So based on what review you've done of the audit and tonight's discussion, the select board is going to be asked to vote to approve the fiscal year 2020 audit also. So with that introduction, I'd like to present Craig Peacock, partner at Powers and Sullivan, to give us a rundown of his firm's audit of our financial statements. You're muted. It happens to all of us.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction and the overview, Chairman Green. Thank you, members of the board, for your time tonight. We are here to discuss the 2020 audit. As your chair, Select Board Chair Green mentioned, we had met with the audit committee and what I would call did a really deep dive. Your audit committee asks a lot of great questions. We really get into the weeds, if you will, and answer a lot of those technical type questions. So I'm gonna try to keep this at the 1,000-foot level, move kind of quickly through it, and more than willing to answer any questions if there are any in the end. Again, this is related to the fiscal 2020 audit. The town received an unmodified opinion on its financial statements, which is the best that you can get. That is what you want. We had no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the conduct of the audit. We did not find. Again, the management letter addresses what we consider to be areas of strengthening internal controls and such, but nothing came or elevated to the point of being a significant deficiency or material weakness. Just some of the key points for this year that I think the board might like to hear about is for years we've been talking about GASB 75, the other post-employment benefit liability, because of the town's funding and the amount of funds you put aside, the actuary was able to use what we call a blended rate for your new valuation this year. And we saw a decrease in that overall liability of just about $4.7 million this year. The second largest liability recorded on your books is the net pension liability. That liability actually saw a $26.4 million decrease. And I just want to mention that the pension liability is recorded, the system's year ended December 31/19, as opposed to the town's fiscal year of June 30th. The main reason for that decrease was that retirement systems for calendar year 19 had a very strong investment performance. And essentially the large surplus generated, if you will, with the investment gains allowed ultimately for a decrease in the liability. So that was, really good. So you're looking between the OPEB and the net pension, a little over $30 million decrease in your liability for this year, recorded on the books, which is great. Budgetarily, the town saw about $1.5 million drop to the bottom line. Even through these times, we were able to see strong collections of, essentially 99% first year collections of our real and personal property. Didn't have any major issues at all in conduct of the audit, as you were told. And, keeping it high level, those are sort of the big items throughout the financial statements. The management letter, the town made a lot of progress. We had 4 comments in the prior year management letter, 3 of which were completely resolved, 1 of which we would consider what we would say is partially resolved. There was progress made and there's just some details left to button down. We only had 2 new comments this year that both surrounded around the student activity funds. Just one, that there's a requirement for an audit, and we haven't been able to ascertain whether a review or an audit was done on those funds. And we just saw a little accounting, nothing material to the financials, but a programmatic issue, if you will, that it looks like it occurred through one of the replenishments, and we just brought that to the attention of both the school and your comptroller so that they can take a look into that. Your chair mentioned the federal report, the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. I'll briefly touch on that. That report has not been finalized yet this year, only due to the COVID pandemic. And the reason being is because there are various buckets of federal funds that communities are receiving and have the ability to spend. And up through January, the federal government was still providing us as auditors the guidance of what we are required to look at and how we're required to audit those funds. So generally the report is due March 31 with what we refer to as the clearinghouse. 2-month extension. We don't anticipate the towns needing an extension. We should be done within the next couple of weeks tops. I've been working with both the school and the comptroller's office to get all the information required. But in effect, that when issued, that report will also have an unmodified opinion, again, which is what the town wants. So overall, in summary, the audit went very well. Again, information was timely, and I'm more than happy to dive down into any questions if the board might have any.
So, any questions from the board before we vote? Or questions that you need answered before you vote? Ms. Heller? You're muted.
I'm sorry. I'd like to ask Mr. Kleckner where we are with the BFAC recommendation of rotating auditors. I think it was like every 3 or 4 years, if I recall correctly.
My understanding that was before the audit committee, and they voted to extend the audit report, the audit engagement.
They voted what?
To extend the audit engagement. I wasn't at the meeting, but that's my understanding.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so will this be something that's brought up on a regular basis, or?
Well, at a certain point, we should put out a RFR to see what's out there, who's willing to respond, and what their qualifications, et cetera, are. I think the audit committee's view was that given this COVID pandemic, it's not really a great time to do that.
And also, we've been very happy with our auditors so far. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, this is in no way a criticism of them, but
And
just that,
yeah, I mean, among the reasons for going out with an RFR is not necessarily to look for a new, in this case, auditor, but to just test the market, see what's out there, see what ideas other firms may have that you may warrant you switching to those firms, or suggesting to Powers and Sullivan that this approach or this way of doing something is something that should be considered. So I mean, going out with an RFR for auditor or any other service is a helpful and useful way of doing things, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're switching vendors. So, Mr. Fernandez, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. This is actually a quick question, I think, and it might be actually for a town administrator rather than the auditor, but you'd mentioned that the outstanding parking ticket receivables issue was resolved. I'm just curious about that resolution. I know we talked about this before. There were a number of just parking tickets that we had not been able to collect, but it was a pretty sizable sum.
Yeah, if I might ask Finance Director Gina Franconi, could you respond to that? This is a question about the resolution of the last year's management finding about collection of parking tickets.
Good evening, Gina Franconi, Finance Director. We are treating the parking tickets like we do the excise tax. We're able to write off parking tickets that we haven't been able to collect. And we're in lockstep with our excise, the motor vehicle excise taxes that we collect. But I want to note that all parking tickets, once they are not paid, and as time goes by, we're able to mark those vehicles, and people are not able to re-register or receive a driver's license until they pay their unpaid parking tickets. So there's really no, we feel quite confident that we will collect. It's just a matter of time and when people need to go to the registry to renew their license. Thank you.
Can you talk about what's the impact of the write-off on the budget?
There really is no impact because we've always had an account for uncollectibles, and so the allowance always it kind of subtracts from what that receivable is. So we feel pretty comfortable that we have enough of an allowance on the books to cover the receivables that may be an issue or are uncollectible.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Mr. Vanscoya, I was waiting for your screen to show up. When you
yeah, I was dashing to the stove. And I have more than one question, so bear with me. The report, getting to the question just asked by my colleague, Mr. Fernandez, the report has this, the management letter has a section that says prior year comments resolved, and then basically just says the following comments were resolved during the current fiscal year. And then it lists outstanding parking ticket receivables. I sort of feel like it would be nice to have more detail than, it would be nice to have some detail as to how that was resolved in the written report. And I appreciate the answer that was just given, but I'm kind of wondering why there isn't in the management letter, why there isn't that kind of detail, or at least some detail as to how this was resolved. And the second thing I want to say is, I'm not sure that I know what to make of the answer. Do we still have it was millions of dollars in tickets that were being carried on the book as, you know, being receivable by the town. But the question was, would we ever see that money? And is that still the circumstances of our parking tickets?
So it is, we're able to collect parking tickets into perpetuity. It just it's when people realize that they have a parking ticket and they can't renew their license or registration, and so then they have to come forward. But the life cycle of a ticket, once it's not paid, if it continues to go unpaid, just like your excise, we will mark your vehicle. So we're reasonably assured that we can collect on all of the parking ticket receivable.
But what are we carrying as receivables that are actually unpaid parking tickets?
Ms. Franconi?
The issue here on Zoom is I'm so sorry, I'm not able to open my files at the same time, but I certainly, I can get back to you and let you know what the receivable is.
So I think he's asking for a dollar amount, and it sounds like what you said was that the dollar amount never exceeds the amount in our reserve fund for unpaid bills. And even with respect to that reserve, we collect on the tickets eventually to cover the unpaid receivables.
I feel as though it'd be useful to know what that number is,
Yeah.
because it wasn't just that there was a number that was quite surprising in terms of the total amount represented in millions of dollars, but also in that there was a sizable portion that was due over 10 years. In other words, they had aged 10 years or more, as I remember. I hope I'm remembering this correctly.
Right, but the ones that were 10 years old were probably $50,000. It wasn't, the most current ones are within the last 4 to 5 years. That's the bulk. But if I look at the spreadsheet, they do decline in the out years. And we have a large student population who receives tickets. And once they are done with school, we really don't see them again, and that is a majority of our parking tickets and excise that is uncollected.
And those are tickets that we won't collect, it sounds like you're saying.
Potentially, yes, unless they come back to Massachusetts and, you know, are residents. But we do see that we do have students who come, they go to school, and then they leave. And those are, we still mark them. But it's more difficult to collect those out of state people.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Hamilton had her hand up first.
Fine.
Oh,
Well,
I'm sorry. Were you finished?
I wasn't, but that's okay. I can come back.
Well, John, I seem to recall the balance being about $9 million. Now, I could be wrong, and I'm not sure how far back that went. So I'll leave it to Ms. Franconi to confirm the number, but that was my recollection from
You are
last year.
correct, Ms. Hamilton. It was around $9 million. And so we just, you know, we can always collect those tickets. It was just a concern that we were carrying this balance that the auditor thought was uncollectible. And so now we, as we do with excise, we carry about 6 or 7 years, and then we write the rest off. But we are certainly able to still collect on anything that's older than that. But on the books, you'll see that we've written off anything older than that.
And it would be useful for me to just see the I guess the percentage of how many of those outstanding are Massachusetts registered versus out of state, so that we have an idea of how likely it is that we will actually collect the money. Because as you alluded to, if they're out of state plates, we will most likely never see that money.
I'll see what we can put together with the Public Safety Office.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Heller.
I was wondering what, if any, kind of reciprocity agreements do we have with other states in terms of parking tickets? You know, I know that sometimes we have agreements with states to collect or for them to help us collect certain items, but do we have those with parking tickets? And is it successful?
I'm not certain what reciprocity we do have. The only ability that I have is to mark them at the registry. I can look into what's happening at the RMV, but I'm not certain how it is or their software that goes, that communicates with other states.
I can kind of jump in just from my experience working at MassDOT during the all electronic tolling program. It was cutting edge at the time in 2016 when we entered into reciprocity agreements with Maine and I believe New Hampshire. Most states don't have reciprocity agreements, and that's because the identifying data that is contained in a DMV database is just so proprietary that you have to put so many safeguards in place, and opening that up to other states right now is very prohibitive.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Van Scoyoc, back to your earlier questions.
Thank you very much. And here's an area that I understand even worse than parking tickets. I mean, my understanding is deficient, even worse than it is on parking tickets. And that has to do with how we track our progress in terms of paying down the, let's say, the pension liability. There's also, you know, what's known as the OPEB liability, but let's just talk about the pension liability. So my understanding over the years has been that we are on course to pay the pension liability off. And that's why we have to, unfortunately, you know, it's not easy to swallow, but we have to appropriate a considerable sum of money towards paying down the pension liability every year. And we have to try to stick to it, or we run the risk of a lowered bond rating. And I did hear it said in the report on 2020 that we made progress because there was a reduction in the net pension liability because of some good performance of the retirement funds. But then I went back and looked at the table starting in 2014 when the pension liability was 191 million. And we are now in 2019, December 31st, 2019, and the pension liability is 220 million. So it doesn't seem to me that over the long term, we're actually paying down the pension liability, or am I just misreading this information?
Would
Peacock, do you?
Yes, I don't mind answering that one. Essentially what the pay down that the town is working towards is essentially the unfunded liability for past service cost. Current employees are earning benefits each and every day. So there's two components to the appropriation that you're referring to. It's one for current costs related to current employees, and then one is what we call the unfunded liability for past service costs that had been earned, you know, in years past before communities were funding this liability. And what I would say is that the town of Brookline is still on target to meet the unfunded liability by 2030, which many communities have pushed out, and the statute allows you to go out to 2040. So in really, in looking at our cross section of clients, the town of Brookline is doing quite well with their pension liability. Yes, it is going to continue to increase, as you mentioned, but that is due to the fact that, lack of a better way to say it, the town has not, if the town closed down today and there was no new employee, no employees currently earning benefits, the liability would stay and, we'd catch up with it. But where the life goes on, if you will, and the town is continuing operations, that liability is going to continue to grow day in and day out. It's the past service cost that we're looking to essentially pay down, again, by a maximum of 2040, but the town is on target for 2030.
Ms. Hamilton?
That's a real source of pride for me, at least, that we've been able to stay on that 2030 schedule, even despite COVID. So I just want to acknowledge the town administrator for his commitment to doing that. I know that when I was thinking about running for select board, when I saw that, it signaled to me that we were really investing in the future to address that, because so many communities don't. To get to a question that I see pop up in the Q&A, did the select board or audit committee ask the auditor to test the town's compliance with the town's own key policy ratios and credit agency ratios as BFAC recommended? If not, why not?
Peacock, can you answer that? The issue was whether, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, so I don't, I wasn't privy to the whole BFAC report, and exactly, I do know the town of Brookline has a lot of, fiscal policies and different ratios that they work with and such. If I can answer it two ways. One, they don't impact, or they don't really come into play throughout the conduct of an audit per se. They don't really, lend themselves into the financial statements. It's more to maintain your AAA rating and to, allow the town to maximize the use of every dollar of appropriations and revenues that you do get. But I would suggest that there was not a specific request to look at specific types of ratios.
And I think the reason for that is that that was sort of outside the scope of your engagement. Is that? And we did have some discussion of that, as I recall.
We definitely had some discussion. We spoke of different ratios and what they mean and that type of thing. Again, the way the audit generally works is if there was a project or so that the town wanted to look into, even outside of the scope of the financial statements, what we generally do as an audit firm, with all due respect, if we're asked to do something that's, an additional 5 or 10 hours, the town's an excellent A client for us. We would incorporate that into the audit without a problem. If a project comes up at any community, realistically, in which the community is looking for a project that maybe has a separate report with it, and is a 20, 30 hour project that is generally outside the scope of the audit contract and would be a separate engagement.
Any other questions? Okay. The next thing we do is vote as a select board to accept the report of the audit committee. Any questions regarding that? Okay, then I move approval or acceptance of the report of the audit committee. Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez? You're muted. I assume that says aye. Okay. Who's next? Mr. Vanscoya,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Thank you, Mr. Peacock.
Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you.
Okay. Next, question of approving the appointment of Andy Liu to fill the vacant school committee position on the Pierce School Building Committee. That's fairly straightforward. Whenever we have a change on a building committee, the MSBA, that's funded by the MSBA. The MSBA requires us to file a new document indicating the new membership of the committee. So this is a fairly straightforward thing. Any questions about it?
I'll just say he is replacing the current chair of the school committee, Suzanne Federspiel, who I'm sure, you know, is very busy. And he is a Pierce school parent himself. So
Okay.
I think it's an ideal appointment.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, all in favor, Ms. Heller,
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez,
Aye.
Mr. Vanscoya.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Next, Marion Street Project Eligibility Letter. Okay, do we have Ms. Steinfeld here or? Okay, take us through this, Ms. Steinfeld.
To acknowledge me, Mr. Chair, I didn't hear you.
Okay, take us through this,
Oh, okay.
Ms. Steinfeld.
Okay.
Sorry,
Allison Steinfeld, Planning Director. As you recall, we had a public hearing last week on an application for a project eligibility letter submitted by Brookline Housing Authority relative to 32 Marion Street. I prepared a draft for your review. I did not receive any comments from any select board member. So what you have before you is the letter you received last week as well. This letter is due to be submitted to the state by Friday.
Right. I don't see it in the package. Is it in there, Devin? It is. Okay, so I have an old package, as as happens many times. There are no changes. I think everyone was sort of satisfied with the letter, given that this is basically is a friendly. Let's see, am I thinking of the right one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. A friendly 40B by Brookline Housing Authority. So, any questions? Any further discussion, Ms. Hamilton?
This may not be relevant to our discussion, but one of the abutters who made public comment said that he was going to be filing something, a complaint or something legal. I don't know if we've received anything to date, because I don't think I've seen anything.
You have received a letter from an attorney.
Okay.
And it is in your packet.
Okay.
Issue that I'm sure the ZBA will address, assuming BHA does in fact get its appel and applies for comprehensive permit.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, I move approval of the PEL letter for project eligibility letter for 32 Marion Street. All in favor? Ms. Heller?
Aye. Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Vanscoya?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Thank you very much.
Hold on. Okay. Thank you. I'm losing my screen here, so bear with me. Okay, Small Business Development Committee charge. Discussion and possible vote on changes to the charge of the Small Business Development Committee. Mr. Fernandez, you're not still chairing that, are you? So who's?
Until someone else decides otherwise, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about this.
So this is actually, there are a couple of changes in here. One is, and you'll see it in your packet, just to change to the language, a line that says special attention paid to minority and women-owned businesses. we wanted to be able to expand that a little bit. And you'll see a comment in here from Meredith Mooney, who staffs our committee, really thinking about all different kinds of businesses that are in the state supplier diversity program, everything from minority business enterprises and women business enterprises, which are captured, but also those around veterans and LGBTQIA folks and those folks with disabilities, and really thinking about the special attention to recruiting and supporting businesses that are and business owners that are adding diversity to the community. So that's one I think small but important change. The other change that you'll see in here is when we originally submitted the sort of the charter for this group, for this committee, we didn't cap the number of members, so we're doing that. And we had, as a new committee, we didn't also stagger any of the terms, and so we wanted to include that as part of what we're doing as well. And those are, I think, the two critical changes in here. And as you know, we have interviewed at this point. You'll see it in the very next page. I just call it a great number of people for the Small Business Development Committee. So before we added anyone new to the committee, we thought it'd be very important to make these sort of more administrative changes to the charge. And we'll have a plan going forward with respect to the staggering of the terms and how we'll handle that.
Great. Any questions from the board? It's fairly straightforward. Okay, I move approval of the Small Business Development Committee edited or revised charge. All in favor, Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Brookline Housing Authority Partnership Proposal. I think you're quarterbacking this also, Mr. Fernandez. Okay.
Right. So a few weeks back, I presented this proposal. We asked for feedback from the board. I think what's in our packet is a markup from the chair, Mr. Green, and I think the only, I think supportive of everything in here. I think the only question that I would have is, and welcome, by the way, other feedback right now, but is the change from partnership to working group, and is this, for Bernard, this would be for you, is this the type of working group, when we talk about a working group within the town, that is different from establishing a committee, essentially? Is that what you mean?
I think it's sort of the model that we use many times to get together with staff and other people to sort of work through problems. Not necessarily as formally as a committee does, but in a more effective way, because you're dealing with the people who are involved and who have ability to take immediate action to solve problems. And we've done this in a number of circumstances, and I think it's been very successful.
Yeah, I know we're doing it right now with I forget the number of the warrant article right now, but one of the warrant articles around climate and fossil fuel free in tandem with the planning department. Yeah, we got
the material last week. And with respect to the BHA town relationship, I mean, this is I think a really good way of ensuring that issues that BHA has that the town can have an impact on are brought to our attention, and we can work through the solutions in a way that is doesn't require a whole lot of formalities and difficulties.
Great.
So that was the reason for my changes.
I have a question. I have a question, more curiosity than suggested for change. I don't know whether it should be changed or not, but I noticed that you have a non-parallel structure for the co-chairs. That in one case it's a select board member and the other co-chair is a staff person on the BHA. So I'm wondering why you don't have, a select board member and a BHA commissioner. I thought they were called trustees, but anyway, a member. I don't know, seemed that seemed different to me than things we've done in the past, but maybe there's a reason for it.
Yeah. Not necessarily. No, it's something I hadn't thought about before about it being, but I think that it's important to have, Michael Alperin, deeply involved in this work, and he's also.
Of course, I have no doubt about that. It just
definitely.
Just as Mel is on the committee too, so.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. Do you think that's an issue, or is it just
I don't know. I mean, it seems to me, it's just a little, seems to me, I like symmetry.
asymmetrical? Yeah. No, and that's not something that's come up when I talk to either of the Michaels about this. That's Mike Jacobs and Mike Alperin, the commissioner, the chair of the board of commissioners and the director. So hadn't come up before as an issue. Yeah.
And we definitely want Michael Alperin involved because he's the one who's
no question. We also want Mel involved. But
yeah. And does Mel need to be co-chair? I mean, I guess that's the question. I don't have an answer.
You're asking me?
That's not quite the question, Bernard. The question is, that's not quite the question. The question is whether the co-chairs should be both members of the boards of their respective groups, as opposed to one board member and one staff member. That's all I'm asking.
That's not it. What do you think of that, Mr. Fernandez?
Well, we have Michael Alperin and Michael Jacobs, Mike Jacobs in the attendees list, and maybe they have some thoughts on this. I'm fine either way. Yeah. Maybe we can have some kind of duel or something to settle this.
Mr. Alperin, Mr. Jacobs, what do you think?
I defer to Mike, but I'm very receptive and open to Mike being co-chair.
Okay.
And very much am eager and happy to participate on this working group.
I don't think it's a huge deal. I mean, ultimately, it's the substance that counts as opposed to who's chair here. So if symmetry is important, that's fine, but it really doesn't matter.
Well, one way it does matter is that as chair of the trustees, you have certain authorities that may be important that Michael doesn't have, that the executive director may not have. Now that may be a minor point, but I think it does speak to the concerns that Ms. Heller has about symmetry.
That's fine. It's going to be more in terms of organizing the meetings. I think that's really what the responsibility of the chairs is going to be. Yeah. And Michael and I work hand in hand. So I think it's fine to have me as a co-chair. Okay. And Michael and I work very closely.
Mr. Fernandez, you object to that?
No, that's a great edit. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Ms. Heller, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. Are we finished discussing the entire thing, or should we just vote on this?
I'm sorry. Okay, it's getting late. Yeah, any further discussion? Okay, make your motion now.
Okay, so I move that we accept the recommendation to establish a working group, and that the co-chairs be one select board member and one BHA trustee member.
Right, but otherwise, as indicated in the edit, in the what we call it, revised draft in our packet.
Right.
Okay. Okay, all in favor, Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Wait, Ms. Fernandez, you have something?
Nope, I said that's great with me. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You said aye, right? Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Let's see who's next. Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay, we have a deal.
Thanks for all your support on this to the board members and also to the folks at the BHA. Appreciate y'all.
Okay, thank you.
Get it going.
Thank you.
Let's see. So when are we going to find out? Let's see. Oh, annually, the work of the working group. Okay, got it. There's a reporting section. Good. Okay, next, remote town meeting request. Question of authorizing the remote town meeting request is submitted by the town moderator. Mr. Fernandez, will you explain the resolution that you were able to achieve with the town moderator? Explain to us what happened.
Sure. So when we reviewed this at the last meeting, one of the item 5 for those that are looking at the packet, there was a provision there that specifically mentioned registered voters, and you'll see that some piece of that is still in there, but seemed to indicate in some way, at least the direct reading of it, that only registered voters would be allowed to participate in town meeting, meaning be able to sign up to make comment and speak at town meeting as folks are able to do. And of course, that doesn't accurately reflect what we've been doing all along, which is we've had young people in Brookline speak up on issues, and certainly they're underage and not registered voters. And we haven't really, in our knowledge, asked anyone whether or not they're a registered voter before they speak before town meeting. So so Moderator Gadsby was absolutely open to changing this, and we saw that he did change that. It still has some language around registered voters, which I think are mostly unnecessary. However, it does say that persons other than resident registered voters will be permitted to participate as long as they comply with the aforesaid notice provision, which is just to let the town clerk know not less than 48 hours in advance of the date when you wish to speak that you'd like to speak on a particular issue. So so it's been fixed. I would have written it differently, but it gets the job done.
Great. Well, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, any further question or discussion? Okay, all in favor, Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So we're down to boards and commissions appointments. See, we have appointments or reappointments to the Cannabis Mitigation Advisory Committee. I think these are all appointments. Mr. Kleckner, do you have some people for us to vote on?
It is just one person. This is Devin.
Okay, hi, Devin.
And he interviewed before you last week. This is to fill a vacancy that was created by someone who had to resign because they moved out of the neighborhood.
All right.
So we have one applicant, Mr. Chair, it's Danny Stone.
Okay. All in favor of, I'm sorry, name is Danny Stone?
Danny Stone.
Danny Stone. I believe that the vacancy is in the Coolidge Corner neighborhood, and it's a term that's expiring in 2022.
So it's a one-year term, okay.
Yeah.
We
Well,
interviewed him
really,
last week, Daniel Stone. He's a town meeting member.
All right.
Precinct 10, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So all in favor of appointing Danny Stone to the Cannabis Mitigation Advisory Committee? Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. And unless there's any other business, that is the end of this meeting. Mr. Kleckner, did you take off your glasses because you have something to say?
No, I'm going home to shovel.
Oh, God. I'm gonna eat dinner. Okay, thank you. This is the end of the meet, or that's the end of the meeting. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.